Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting a fascinating piece of modern political communication right under the microscope. We're going to objectively unpack the key themes, the rhetorical strategies, and the very specific claims made by Barnaby Joyce in a recent, and let me tell you, highly stylized Sky News interview. If you follow politics, you know that messaging is absolutely everything. This is a brilliant case study in positioning. We're going to break down exactly how a politician uses setting, statistics, and storytelling to build a compelling narrative for their target audience. Let's get right to it. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to map this sprawling interview out into 5 distinct logical pillars. First, setting the scene. Second, polling and public mood. Third, the wealth paradox. Fourth, red tape and regulations. And finally, political theater. Pillar 1, setting the scene, specifically the campfire aesthetic. Now, you know as well as I do that in political communication, where you speak from is often just as important as what you're saying. And the visual choices at the very start of this interview, they are completely deliberate. Notice the immediate visual grounding here. Joyce isn't sitting in some sterile television studio under bright lights. No, he's broadcasting live from a shed in Danglemar. He actually points out the boys in the background who've been mustering cattle all day, literally sitting around a campfire. When he drops the line, "That's Australia, don't you love it?" he is instantly establishing this rural, everyman identity. It's a highly calculated aesthetic choice designed to signal pure authenticity. He's framing himself not as a distant politician in the capital, but as a grounded, working Aussie sitting by the fire, planning out the stock for the months ahead. Moving on to Pillar 2, polling and public mood, targets and tactics. So, with that grounded persona locked in, let's look at how Joyce addresses the macro landscape, specifically polling data and what he claims is a massive shift in the public's mindset. When the host challenges him on dipping opinion polls, Joyce pivots straight to the raw, cold mechanics of political survival. He mentions he'd obviously love his party to be polling in the 20s, sure, but he notes that the reality of the system means securing just 15% of the vote is enough to guarantee a senator in every single state. But it's not just about the math for him. He argues this baseline support comes from a fundamental shift in the Australian people. From rural outposts like Dangle Miles all the way to the suburbs of Sydney, he claims voters are universally trying to claim back their authority from the executive government and are, in his words, completely rejecting lefty garbage. So the crucial point here is how he waves off the negative polling data that simply doesn't fit his narrative. He outright accuses the pollsters of engaging in push polling. He describes this as putting extra spin on the ball to basically force a specific answer out of people. His argument is that instead of asking about broad, everyday economic issues, these polls deliberately corner his party around highly niche, controversial topics, like abortion or teenage voters. Why? To artificially generate negative sentiment. By calling out what he sees as the fear behind the questions, he's essentially trying to inoculate his audience against trusting those mainstream poll numbers at all. Which brings us to Pillar 3, the wealth paradox, resources versus reality. This right here forms the absolute core of his macroeconomic argument. Once he gets past the polling, Joyce pivots to what he claims is the real issue driving voter frustration. And it's a stark paradox between Australia's potential and its current reality. On one side of the ledger, you have this nation practically overflowing with natural resource wealth. We're talking coal, oil, gas, iron, or the whole shebang. By all metrics, he argues, Australia should be one of the absolute wealthiest nations on Earth, just completely rocking it. But on the flip side of that ledger, he points to a growing, palpable sense of public frustration and malaise. The narrative he pitches is one of a wealthy nation whose citizens feel like they are actively going backwards economically, missing out on the prosperity that they feel is rightfully theirs. To put that into perspective and add some serious urgency to this economic paradox, Joyce introduces a social warning. He claims that everyday Australians are looking overseas, specifically at Europe, with genuine fear. He says voters are watching Europe's current social and economic trajectory and are demanding that red lines be drawn at home to prevent that exact same decline from happening in Australia. It's a really powerful framing device. It essentially tells the voter, hey, it's not just that we aren't getting ahead, it's that if we don't change course right now, we are actively in danger. Pillar 4, red tape and regulations, the scope of government overreach. Now, you might be wondering, if a rich nation is getting poorer, who exactly does he blame? Well, Joyce points the finger squarely at structural government overreach. He argues that the executive government is basically socializing private assets, dictating what people can actually do on their own land. He even cites environmental protections for things like frogs and moss as the ridiculous culprits holding back economic progress. And to make this abstract idea of red tape truly tangible to the average voter, he throws out a very specific, alarming number. He claims that a staggering 20 to 25% of the price of a modern house is driven entirely by government regulations. By tying regulatory overreach directly to the housing market, which, as we know, is one of the most pressing cost of living issues right now, he takes a dry complaint about bureaucracy and turns it into a direct hit on the viewer's wallet. And this brilliantly illustrates his strategy of translating abstract policy into a memorable, personal story. Joyce shares this anecdote about a color-coded zoning map for his own property. He explains that anything coded blue means he's allowed to act without government interference. But get this, that only covers his front lawn. If it's yellow, he needs permission. And if he touches anything in the pink zones, he claims he's facing literal jail time. Whether you agree with the underlying zoning laws or not, you have to admit this color-coded breakdown is incredibly sticky messaging. It paints a vivid picture of a landowner trapped by an overbearing state, perfectly reinforcing his broader theme of lost common sense. This leads us to our final pillar, Pillar 5, Political Theater, the Turnbull Attack. We all know political messaging isn't just about policy, right? It's heavily about contrast and interpersonal rivalries. Late in the interview, the topic turns to 71-year-old former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who the host refers to as a ghost popping up on a book tour. The contrast here is just striking. Joyce, who spent the entire interview projecting this relaxed, fireside, everyman vibe, suddenly unleashes a deeply personal, sharp rhetorical attack. He accuses Turnbull of being filled with horrible bitterness, telling him that at his age, he only has about 15 years left where things really matter, and bluntly advises him to just give up on it and go back and love your family. The strategy underlying this attack is super revealing. By framing his high-profile critics as bitter, hateful ghosts who need to either pick a lane or just go away, Joyce actually elevates his own positioning. Next to the picture he paints of a resentful political elite, Joyce's own campfire populism looks, at least to his target audience, like the voice of reason and common sense. It's a totally deliberate juxtaposition. You've got the angry insider on one hand versus the grounded outsider on the other. So there we have it. We've fully deconstructed the pitch. We've seen the careful staging in the Danglemarsh shed. We've unpacked the total dismissal of polling, the framing of a wealthy nation artificially held back by frogs, moss, and color-coded maps, and of course, the sharp theater of personal political rivalries. So the big, overarching question I want to leave you with today is this. As the political landscape continues to shift, how effectively will this highly specific blend of rural authenticity, economic frustration, and aggressive populism actually translate, at the ballot box? It's a very precise deployment of targeted messaging, but at the end of the day, only the voters will decide if it truly hits the mark. Keep this breakdown in your back pocket the next time you watch a political interview, because there is absolutely always a strategy behind the scenery. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you next time.